My name's Gavin Hayman, and you are very welcome to this session. And thank you for coming along on what I hope is a sunny July, wherever you happen to be at the moment. You're going to give me about 50 minutes of your time, and hopefully I'm going to give you some tried and tested approaches for managing the classroom that will promote some good relationships and de-escalate situations before they get out of control. And hopefully some of these ideas might stop them from getting out of control in the first place. As Louisa said, please pop comments and questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll try to pick them up by the end of the session. Okay, so we're going to delve into some practical approaches, but the simple truth is that there's no trick or tactic that can beat using a good relationship to manage behaviour. This really is the practical approach. A child won't throw a chair at you or tell you to clear off or something far more saucy if they trust you and if they like you. How do you do that? Well, you can achieve that by creating a connection in good times that you can rely on in bad times. When disruptive behaviour occurs in the classroom, a need's being communicated. And if we invest time and energy to improve relationships, as you'll know from my previous sessions, we will understand the young people a bit better and will be in a better position to meet their needs and de-escalate situations before they get out of hand. And what I'll say before I go on is that you are going to get these slides at the end of the session. So yeah. So before we try and teach anything, whether it's curriculum or behaviour, we've got to make a connection. So in that spirit, I'm going to try and connect us all right now by asking you to put your favourite dessert in the chat. So if you feel like it, put your favourite sweet treat in the chat, just to give you some practice using the chat at least. But also we can mock you if you decide that eating a mess is your favourite dessert or something like that. Or we can have a look and see if something interesting comes up. So do that as I yammer on. So a zero tolerance approach to behaviour management with sanctions and consequence systems works for so-called good children, but doesn't really work for the vulnerable ones. Schools that go down this authoritarian route can be miserable places because the emphasis is on punishment rather than finding the cause of the problem. The approach that some schools use just promotes anger rather than repairing and promoting good relationships. You all know the drill. A misbehaving child will be given a non-verbal warning, followed by a verbal one, and maybe one last warning before a punishment's delivered. We don't call them punishments, but that's what they are. In primary schools, the child will be sent to another classroom maybe, or sat in the corner or sent to the head teacher's office. When I was a head teacher, I used to get a steady stream of them until we changed what we did. In high schools, this kind of behaviour is usually dealt with some kind of detention or isolation, often in a secluded booth, sitting on their own, segregated from other pupils for several days. I've worked all the way through phases, but the first time I saw isolation booths in a secondary school, it was very much like going into a toilet. They've each got their cubicle and they sat, really horrible. But once these children are identified as misbehaviour magnets, they will fall into a vicious cycle of getting into trouble. And the victimization that these children will feel will lead them to become increasingly resentful and hostile towards their teachers and other pupils, which will marginalize them even more. As you know, behavior that challenges us signals a need for support, not punishment. If we want to fix it, we need to understand why it's happening and what's causing it. Now, I said this session was going to be practical. I'm really going to try and keep that promise to you. So my first practical suggestion is, instead of going down the detention or isolation route, put regular mentoring sessions in place to help the young person not only learn about the consequences of their actions when something goes wrong, but as a space for them to offload and talk about whatever's on their mind. By offering time in instead of time out, you can address issues that they might be bottling up, and that might be causing this dysregulation that you're seeing when things go wrong. The child won't feel picked on, but they will get a chance to be heard. And when things have gone wrong, they'll have a safe space to understand where they've slipped up, and they'll get some help to work out how to right the wrong and not repeat the behaviour. For the DFE and for other people, I've put mentoring programs in primary and secondary schools in some really challenging areas up and down the country for children and young people with behaviour that you would describe as problematic. And even in the most extreme cases, even when you've got children that have been permanently excluded from school, mentoring rather than punishment has proven really successful in developing more respectful ways of interacting with others and addressing the behaviour. Now, anger. Anger, that's scary. Anger is complicated, especially in classrooms, but it's most often set off by shame or embarrassment, or frustration or powerlessness or anxiety, of course. And when a child responds with anger, it quickly escalates to aggression and disruption. And though outbursts can appear unpredictable and chaotic, they usually follow a pattern with a clear trigger, an escalation, and a crisis, followed by a period of recovery. You've probably seen this curve before. And if you can identify the trigger, you can reduce the chances of escalation. So here are literally all the triggers, including trigger. Now, where there's a lack of engagement or where expectations aren't clear, you'll probably see some low-level disruption rather than a full-scale meltdown. When children feel confused about expectations or are disengaged or they're not interested in what's going on, they'll start to disrupt in small ways. We've all seen it in classrooms. Likewise, if the learning is pitched at the wrong level, the ones in the class who struggle academically or feel overwhelmed will probably engage in avoidance behaviours. And the same is true for your more able in the class. They'll refuse to participate or they'll start to act up. I was that kid, not because I was super clever, just to be clear. Cultural differences, language barriers can feed that feeling of exclusion as well. They can impact on their sense of belonging and lead to behavioural challenges. I guess it would be handy if you could have subtitles for lessons like you can have tonight. Of course, unmet, unidentified and unsupported SEND can be a trigger too. And those red ideas are the ones that are the more explosive triggers. And despite everything we know about supporting children and young people with SEND, learning, communication and sensory processing needs frequently trigger behavioural difficulties. Environmental, social triggers, they've got the potential to be more explosive in the classroom because they represent an attack on our basic needs, such as the need to feel safe, to be secure and to belong. Anybody that knows that Maslow's pyramid of needs, you know, the safe, secure and belong ones are the most important ones. Social pressures within the classroom can lead to poor behaviour too, as can poor attachment as a result of a tricky home life. Children who struggle to regulate their emotions are prone to outbursts, tantrums and other disruptive behaviours, especially when they're experiencing stress or anxiety. Still thinking about Maslow's triangle, physical discomfort, including hunger, tiredness or illness, but also issues in the classroom environment like temperature, noise or light can really impact on behaviour, and we're seeing so much more of this these days. As can unexpected transitions between activities, changes in routine, or those transitions between home and school. I'm willing to bet everyone in this session has some experience of supporting a child who struggled to say goodbye to a parent at the start of the school day. Long story short, you need to look for the trigger and don't let anybody tell you that the behaviour you're seeing is random. Now, we can't do much to control what happens when they aren't in school, but we can manage the classroom to create a learning environment that minimises those triggers. The classroom should be a relational, nurturing place. Adults in the classroom should be reliable and consistent in their responses, and they should know the young people inside and out. We should know how our children prefer to learn, whether there are particular social groups or friendship groups that will impact positively or negatively on them, and whether there are any learning or sensory needs that we need to think about. We should also give children opportunities to be independent, as this is going to build their self-esteem and reduce the chances of dysregulation. We should be curious. We should always ask, you know, what's going on. We shouldn't always assume. We should never assume. Children should always feel that they will be listened to, and they should be confident that all of the adults working with them actually like them. And none of this is unreasonable. All of this will make your classroom a much more relational, friendly, purposeful place, and your school too. So relationships are vital, but so is good quality teaching. Planning lessons that keep learners focused and motivated is key. And part of securing engagement is about creating plenty of opportunities to give children a sense of control and autonomy over their learning. Boredom often leads to disruptive behaviour, but you can avoid this by giving them something interesting to do. So if it doesn't inspire you or excite you, then don't inflict it on your children. And if your relationship with other adults in this classroom and in the school should be strong enough to say, this isn't much fun. Setting clear and consistent rules and expectations is important too, but so is discussing and agreeing these with your children to ensure that they own the rules and understand what's expected of them. They will absolutely police your classroom, and their own behaviour if they've helped to develop the boundaries. And in your schools, you probably spend the good first few weeks of term of every new year in September, going through rules, maybe developing classroom rules. And if you don't, it's really worth trying. Alongside clear expectations, we need to be clear and concise, which is hopefully what I'm doing to Nick tonight, with our instructions, especially for tasks and activities, and particularly with young people who are more vulnerable to dysregulation. Unclear instructions can lead to confusion and frustration, which will lead to disruptive behaviour in even the most angelic children. And I've been into classes where, again, even the ones that are always good will lose it if they don't know what they're meant to be doing, because it's that fear, it's that anxiety, that not knowing what's going on. It's really important to be a consistent adult, to remain positive in the face of challenging situations. Many of our most vulnerable young people have experienced inconsistent interactions with key adults. So we need to be a source of security for them by providing regular, reliable and predictable attention, and by giving them that sense of safety through our tone of voice, our facial expressions and our body language. If you've been to any of my other sessions, you'll know that talk a lot about this. It almost goes without saying in our quest for harmony in the classroom that we need to model positive behaviour. If you want to see good behaviour from them, you need to demonstrate this in your own interactions. I was in a school a little while ago where I was called in to try and sort this young person out in year 4 who no one could get anything out of him. He was always dysregulating. It was always a big problem. And I went into the classroom, and the TA had wandered over to him because I was there, to make a big fuss and show that they was interested, and asked this young person sort of how their weekend had gone, because I think they'd been to one of my incept training and realised, that's something you should do. And so this kid looked up, and he was so impressed. He was asked, so he started telling her about his weekend. And I thought, that's pretty good. And he was looking away, wasn't really focusing, and the TA wandered off whilst he was in mid-flow. And he looked up, saw that she'd gone off to do something else, and I completely wrecked him. And then his behaviour was terrible for the rest of the time I was in the room, because he hadn't had that relationship modeled to him. And basically, that person had tried to pretend to be interested, but wasn't interested. You really have to be genuinely interested. So I'm going to delve into a bit more detail to pull out some really practical strategies you can use in the classroom. Let's see. So we know young people learn best when they've got strong self-esteem, they feel a sense of belonging, and can meet challenges with resilience. So giving children responsibility, control over their learning and experiences is going to build their confidence and reduce that challenging behaviour. Offering choices will empower them, and this approach can be really effective when supporting young people who are experiencing pathological demand avoidance, or PDA, which again is something which is growing in, I guess, visibility. So how can we create engaging lessons that offer pupils choices and give them control and autonomy? Well, first of all, we can give them some choice in their tasks. So instead of assigning a specific activity, we can offer them choices that cover the same learning objectives. So a writing task, for example, you want to give them a writing task, maybe a retelling of Cinderella, but instead of getting them just to do a standard recount, why not offer them the option to retell the story as a poem, or as a recipe, or maybe some text messages, or some diary entries. This approach will engage even the most reluctant writer to have a go, because they will be able to choose how they want to respond. I've done it with year 3s, I've done it with year 10s. The idea of retelling a story via text message or diaries it's mind-blowing for them in a way. And the more able pupils will really grab hold of this as an idea. Now, it sounds chaotic, I know, but it actually isn't. It's an approach that a lot of schools are using, and it really works. It does require a rethink about how to approach planning and assessment, but it does lead to greater collaboration, engagement, and some really great writing. And I think that's what we're aiming for in schools. We want to get the best work out of the children. So if we need to change how we're approaching it, I don't see a problem with that. Offering young people choices about how they can demonstrate their understanding of a concept is a great way to increase engagement and quality of work. So instead of using a traditional maths test, why not get them to create a video or a presentation to explain the concepts they've been learning. They say if you whatever you teach, you understand more or you understand better. So why not do that? Of course, I know that it won't be practical to run a class like this all the time, but building choices into lessons, that's the key thing. And it's certainly possible. So take maths again. Instead of a list of problems, you give them some dice to make digits to go into problems. I know some of this is teaching grandmothers to suck eggs, but really starting any topic in any subject with questions even, or getting them to create a mind map to share what they know already. They're great ways to use knowledge that's already in the room and to find out what more they want or they need to know. Again, it's all about choices, trying to find ways for you to give control to them. Another good idea, which you're probably already using, is to make sure your library is stocked with books that might be at a reading age that's different to an interest age. I think in secondary schools we call them team reads, where the interest age might be 12 to 15, but the reading age is 7 to 9, so they can actually decode them. We know that a lot of our young people don't like to appear different to their peers. This can be a massive source of anxiety and can lead to dysregulation. So making sure they can engage with the content will enable them to be independent and to read alongside their more able peers. But again, comics, graphic novels, even letting them trawl through some pre-approved web pages will foster a love of reading. I've had children, if we show a video, we put the subtitles on, again, just to keep that reading going again. All of this will encourage that autonomy to select their own learning materials and boost their self-esteem, which will enhance their self-regulation, because so much of dealing with dysregulation is trying to avoid it in the first place. So the next thing we can tweak is the environment. We can give them more control by letting them choose their work environment within the classroom or even outside of it. Some might prefer to work at a desk, while others might prefer to sit on a rug or use a standing desk. That's what I'm doing right now, hence why I'm walking around. Some may want to chop and change throughout the session. Most children will begin to lose focus if they're asked to concentrate for longer than their age, plus 2 minutes. So like if you've got a 7-year-old, you can really only expect them to focus for about 9 minutes. And it does work. There's no science in it. That's just old father time telling you that that's what I found. And it is unreasonable to plan movement breaks into lessons. It just requires a bit of planning ahead. And if you don't have the flexibility to have your young people working in different ways, giving them some power over where they sit within the classroom is another easy win. Okay, a quick word on homework. I've got to be honest with you here. In every school I've led as a head teacher, I outlawed traditional homework. Before I took this step, I reviewed international studies, I unpicked longitudinal research and became a proper expert in homework. So it wasn't a decision I took lightly. But instead of setting homework, I prioritized reading because that's a massive source of anxiety and dysregulation, not being able to access the material. So we made sure everybody could read. I was happy for timetables and spellings to go home, and I advocated for special projects, the ones that you see in American movies where the kid comes in with a volcano. And those special projects were designed to get children thinking and talking and enthused about their learning. But I didn't set homework. And you can probably guess what happened. Nothing bad. Results in core subjects kept improving. Teachers had a bit less work to set and mark, and teaching assistants as well. And children read a bit more than they had done previously, probably because we weren't expecting them to do homework. So parents, did a bit more reading with them. The only negativity came from some of our tiger parents, or the ones who had homework when they were at school and didn't do them any harm. So cards on the table, I am anti-homework. However, I do know that most people aren't, and probably most people in this session are in a school where homework's set. So if you're going to set it, provide some choice for homework assignments. If the purpose of homework is to tick off a learning objective, trust me, there will be more than one way to do this. So offer them a choice and make sure those choices aren't always about sitting down and writing in a book, because it really doesn't appeal to, well, most boys, but lots of people. Okay, so back to the classroom. If we want to give our children agency and control over their learning and experiences, we should sometimes let them choose who they want to work with. This will give them a sense of control over their collaboration and promote positive group dynamics. I know some potential combinations might leave you pulling your hair out, but if the task and the outcome are really clearly described, the pressure and ownership of success or failure is going to be on your children. And I I think they might surprise you. But the key to all of this is about giving them choices and stepping back from being in control of everything. By incorporating choices into various aspects of classroom experience, you will promote that autonomy and the engagement and motivation, which will lead to a more positive and productive learning environment. Clarity. Clarity when giving instructions and also when sharing expectations is really essential to ensure that learning runs smoothly in the classroom. So what can we do to be a bit more clear and be a bit more effective? Well, first of all, we need to limit the number of instructions we're giving at any one time. Avoid overwhelming children with too many instructions all at once. So limit instructions just to the essential steps needed to complete the task. And in addition to sharing them orally, provide written instructions that they can refer back to as they go along. Whilst all grown-up men have evolved beyond the need to follow written instructions, trust me, we have, for children and young people, they are a really helpful reference and can reinforce verbal instructions. Talking of which, don't be afraid to repeat and reinforce key instructions and important points all the way through the task or activity. Repetition helps reinforce learning and ensures that your young people stay on track. Now, if we want to hold on to their focus and reduce the risk of dysregulation, we should absolutely try to simplify complex tasks. This is vital, not only to make sure we have clarity, but also to manage anxiety. So try and break down complex tasks into smaller, manageable chunks. To give them ownership of that exercise and simplification, you could support them to work backwards from the end product and identify all the steps they need to get there. Remember, this isn't about doing things for our children and young people. It's about making tasks manageable so they can do them independently. Using sequential language is going to help with that. So if you present instructions in a logical sequence, starting with the first step and progressing to subsequent steps in order, the task is going to be so much more achievable. So use transitional words loads like first, next, then, finally, all the time to indicate that sequence of actions. And that will help to get them thinking in that way as well. And since we're thinking about words, choosing the right ones is an obvious way to be clear in the classroom. Using language that's clear and straightforward and appropriate to the age and comprehension level of the children will really help them to understand their requirements. Even if we know what we might mean, it's really important to try and remember that they might not. I remember as an NQT back in the 90s, I taught a maths lesson in front of an Ofsted inspector and my head teacher, and I was whizzy. I had resources out. It was just great. But I kept talking about we went to the cinema. I kept talking about trailers, trailer this, or the trailer's 5 minutes long, the trailer's 8 minutes long. And we were doing maths, and I didn't realize none of the children knew what a trailer was. They probably called them adverts or something else. But I completely lost the children and got a terrible write-up from the lesson because they went off to the task. The maths was easy to do, but they were all thinking about this trailer and trying to think, well, why would you have a trailer that you might pull with a car? And it was just so confusing. And I didn't spot it because I thought I knew best. So always check for understanding. And after having given some instructions, check for understanding by asking children to repeat the instructions in their own words or by posing questions to assess their understanding. Clarify all those misunderstandings before they start the task, but also make it clear that you're happy to clarify and re-explain in a different way once they get going, because I guarantee a good chunk of the children will get to the table or move from wherever they were and they'll have forgotten what they had to do, which is another good reason for having things written down. Making sure there's time for questions and letting them know that they can ask questions at any time without any fear has been so important to the children and young people I've worked with. So allowing young people the chance to ask questions if they need clarification on anything and encouraging that open dialogue to address concerns will absolutely support positive relationships. Models. I can't emphasize enough the value of models. Wherever possible, we should really try and demo the task or activity before our young people attempt it. We do it in some subjects, but not in all subjects. You think we might do it in PE, we might get them to model, but we don't do it everywhere. So modeling is really important because if you model desired behavior or outcome, it'll help children understand what's expected of them. I was in another school recently when the teacher was stood at the front of the room and was using I can't remember the name of that software. Please put it in the chat. Where you have the class chart and you tick on and they get the points. And basically, she was doing this and adding points to different children that sat, but she hadn't at any point told the children that she wanted them to sit down or be quiet or do anything. But the quick ones that had cottoned on to the idea, but she hadn't actually multi said what she wanted. Anyway, alongside models, visual aids, diagrams, charts, illustrations, they can really help with verbal instructions and help reinforce key concepts. So, you know, put that stuff out as well. Having a set of keywords or explainers on tables for some of those children before, you know, when they go to tables is really important, because it can just cue them in. And by adopting these strategies, we will improve communication in the classroom. If we're clear, if we're concise and comprehensible, we're going to set them up for success in completing tasks and build strong relationships. I mentioned words earlier on. Words really do matter. They've got real power. They can inspire, they can motivate, they can encourage, but they can also tear down or destroy. This is why it's so important to be wise and thoughtful in the words we use, not only with each other, but also when we're talking to ourselves. So using consistent and positive language to build good relationships and behaviour is the core idea. This involves framing instructions and feedback in a constructive and encouraging way, rather than making the other person feel small or told off. You probably use this approach already, but it doesn't hurt just to have a look at it again. So instead of saying stop talking, I guess you probably say, let's focus on work now, thank you. Instead of saying don't run in the hallway, you might most likely say thank you for walking. It's that, you know, you say the thing you want to focus on. Instead of saying no shouting, I bet you probably say something like, let's use our inside voices, thanks. Don't interrupt becomes thank you for your enthusiasm, but please wait for your turn to speak. Why are you late turns into I'm glad you made it to class, are you okay? So flipping negatives to positives doesn't let anyone get away with anything. It just changes the tone from confrontation to care, I guess. And if you want to make your interventions more appealing to young people struggling with PDA, making use of indirect language can be really helpful. So try, I don't know, I wonder if we can focus on our work, or maybe we could use our inside voices, and so on, because that gets around some of that pathological demand avoidance. Phones, really creeping into primary school now. They can be a pain in the classroom and in life in general. They're a massive source of anxiety and dysregulation, but we still glue ourselves to them regardless. Your school might have a no phone or phones away policy, but if this is being ignored by a young person in your classroom, instead of taking that authoritarian approach and embarrassing them in front of the rest of the class by reminding them of the rule and the sanction that they already know, just drift over to them and tell them quietly that it's time to put their phone away and focus on the lesson. By using positive language, you'll redirect the behaviour in a more constructive way, and you'll also maintain a supportive and respectful classroom environment. That positive language will foster cooperation, will reinforce the behaviour you want to see, and will help children feel valued and respected. So we've looked at choosing words carefully so that we can focus on the positive and avoid the negative. This isn't radical, of course. Neither is working to redirect negative behaviour and guiding our young people towards more positive alternatives rather than just punishing them. We've talked about offering choices whenever possible to give young people a sense of control and autonomy. And we've also looked about the importance of providing clear expectations and about how to remind our young people about what they should be doing instead of what they are doing, and ways of doing this that doesn't make them feel small. I can't emphasize enough, and I said it earlier on, about the need to be curious enough for support rather than to deliver a warning or a sanction. Far better to identify the cause of the behaviour and offer support or assistance than push a young person into a dysregulated state. Most of the time, a young person who's acting out will be doing so because they're frustrated with a task. Spotting this early, maybe even before the lesson's begun, and offering them some guidance or some additional resources to help them succeed is something you'll be able to do if you know your children well, and I promise it has a transformational effect on their behaviour. And sometimes really subtle actions can make all the difference in the classroom when it comes to relationship building and tackling crises before they have a chance to escalate. Using proximity is a tried and tested tactic, so just moving a bit closer to a young person who is off task can help redirect the behaviour. Your presence can serve as a subtle reminder of the expected behaviour. That doesn't mean looming over them, It just means being near to them. Linked to this is the use of non-verbal cues to redirect behaviour, such as eye contact or gestures or facial expressions, like the Roger Moore, which I'm not going to attempt to do, but anyway, the eyebrows. A nod or a raised eyebrow will convey your expectations without interrupting the flow of the lesson or drawing unnecessary attention and ramping up the anxiety. The approach only works if you aren't glued to the young person to begin with, of course. So I keep hearing this term, this idea of the Velcro TA. This seems to be, I hadn't heard this before, but we don't want to do that. So creating a positive climate by acknowledging and praising young people when they demonstrate the behavior you want to see is another winner. Catching them when they're good really does encourage them to continue making positive choices. It is a massive oldie, but it is a goodie, I promise. That age+2 idea I shared with you earlier on, if a young person's struggling to focus or regulate their behavior, just offer them a short break to collect themselves together. Don't bunt them out of the classroom, but ask them if they need some time and space to reset. They might be relieved that you've noticed they're struggling. In fact, they will be. And the chance to step out with or without you will prevent an escalation of negative behavior, and will give them an opportunity to reset. Teaching children and young people strategies for self-regulation, such as deep breathing or counting to 10 or taking a quick walk to calm down, will empower them to manage their emotions and behavior. I'll come back to that in a second. But I have to put up a picture of Lawrence Welland-Bowen now, because who better than he to help me talk about the importance of the environment. We touched on it a bit earlier on, but with a bit of care, the environment can be arranged to minimize distractions, to maximize engagement, and to support effective teaching and learning. So how can we do this? First of all, keeping the classroom tidy and organized to reduce visual distractions is an absolute must. It will also encourage young people to keep their personal belongings neat and organized. If you share a classroom with a messy Mary, have a word. And if you're a messy Mary, have a word with yourself. Don't be afraid to rearrange desks or tables in a way that supports interactions. My head teachers over the years, when I was a class teacher, used to tear their hair out of me because I would be changing my classroom for a few weeks. I've used clusters of tables, pairs of tables, a U-shape arrangements, U-shapes inside U-shapes, depending on the activities or the dynamics of my young people. And I usually involve them in any redesigns, because that gave them that power and control again, which we know is a really good thing. But beyond just moving tables and chairs, chopping the classroom up into different functional zones can improve the learning environment no end. If you're a foundation stage colleague in this session, you are experts at this, but there's no reason why even a key stage 4 classroom can't be organised along those lines. Designating areas for whole group work, for small group work and independent study just makes sense. And you can zone classrooms using colour or furniture or rugs or visual markers or just space. Talking of space, it's important to consider traffic flow when organising your classroom. Loads of classrooms and corridors are just too full of stuff. Resources that you might only use for 3 weeks of the year can be kept somewhere else. As a head teacher, I bought sheds and put them out on the playground to try and clear clutter from the classrooms, and to ensure that clear pathways for young people to move around without bumping into each other, because again, that's going to cause problems too. The number of EHCPs I see where one of the conditions in section F or section is needing space, anyway, removing furniture or obstacles from high traffic areas is an absolute must. So taping a line down the middle of the corridors to support young people and adults to move around school, I haven't got a problem with that. It's something that sort of came about a lot more during COVID in the schools I went to see, and it actually works. Of course, some furniture and classroom resources do have to stay in place. So just make sure wherever they are, children can see you or the class teacher or the person doing the thing, or the supporting materials or the interactive whiteboard from their seat without having to crane round or move or be uncomfortable. One of the most common triggers for dysregulation that I've seen when I've gone in to do inspection visits is where a young person can't actually see the board or has had to twist or contort themselves. If you can't change your classroom so everyone can see the input, and some of us are in old Victorian classrooms still with pillars or all sorts of things in the way, just grab an iPad or a laptop and stream the content from the interactive whiteboard or whatever you're doing to those devices. There are lots of free apps available for doing that, or just take a picture of what's going on. Talking of visual aids, you should make sure that these are used strategically to enhance learning and minimize distractions rather than as wallpaper. I think probably most of us now know not to use displays as wallpaper. It was certainly drummed into me as a class teacher. You probably have working walls in your schools. If you don't have them, they're fab, especially when they can be accessed and adapted by your children, so the children go up and add and take away from them. And Ofsted inspectors, trust me, love seeing fresh and engaging working walls that are referenced by teachers and pupils. My last environmental tip before I move on might be a bit out of reach, but it's worth mentioning. About 15 years ago, I was head teacher of a state-of-the-art new build. It was gorgeous. From my office, I could monitor the light and carbon dioxide levels and the temperature in every single room in the school, and to make sure we had the optimal levels for learning. And although the technology was really clever and it could automatically maintain the best amount of oxygen and whatever in the classroom, the light levels and the temperature, the teachers loved to do their own thing and just turn the system off and open the window or which is fine. So that meant we often had to open the windows manually or turn the lights and temperature up and down by the control box. But the lesson I learned from that was about how important these things are to learning, and also that teachers can't help fiddle with things. But if you can, try and optimize the lighting and acoustics in your classroom. Ensure that your classroom is well lit with natural and artificial lighting. There's no reason why you can't get some lamps to create a bright and inviting atmosphere. Check strip lights have been installed in your classroom, that they're high quality ones. They don't resonate at a too low a frequency. Most of them now resonate at least 100 hertz. But if you've got a child with sensory needs or a particular type of autism, they will hear that buzzing, even if we can't. So use adjustable lamps, blinds to control brightness. Make sure laptops and other screens can be set to a dark or a high contrast mode, if that's what your children need. And ask them, again, be curious. And if you can, if you've in a classroom with big high ceilings or in a big space or even a school hall, invest in some soundboards. Now I know these are hard things to adjust on your own, and you might not have the power to adjust those, but your school should have an accessibility plan. It's a law, so they have to be investing every year in that. So it's vital to make sure the light fittings, blinds, and sound insulation are part of that plan. So you've got a voice in that. Now, conflict between children, young people, peers, massive source of disruptive behaviour. You know that. I really am teaching my grandmother's subjects here. But it stands to reason that by teaching conflict resolution skills, we can empower our children to manage disagreements in a more constructive and respectful way, and then reduce that disruptive behaviour. Here are some examples that I've used successfully. I won't go through them all, but encouraging children to listen attentively to each other's perspectives without interrupting is a really vital skill that, if they learn it at an early age, will serve them well as adults. We all know adults who can't do this. I can't. Using a prop can be helpful, though. If you're not holding the prop, you can't speak. And instead of snapping back, you can encourage children to paraphrase what they've just heard to ensure that they understand before responding. That just takes a while to set up, but actually, instead of saying well, just say, get them to repeat. And actually, I've used this, and it slows an argument right down if the person has to process what the other person has said and have I understood this right, instead of you doing that. And it supports everyone to stay out of that fight or flight area and engage their brain. Teaching of reading and writing is absolutely well developed in most schools, but speaking and listening is often assessed, but it's not really taught. Teaching effective communication, teaching children and young people to express their thoughts and feelings assertively and respectfully, making good use of I statements to develop their confidence. That will help them use non-confrontational language when addressing conflicts. There's nothing wrong with being assertive or standing up for yourself and expressing your needs and boundaries clearly and respectfully. So we should teach our children and young people to do this. I don't know about you, but I grew up using a lot of you statements when I was talking. I would say, you always make me angry, or you never listen to me. And it took me a really long time to realize that these statements can be hurtful and put the other person on the defensive, which escalates situations. So instead of using you statements, I switched to using I statements to express my feelings, which was really transformational. So I feel angry when you interrupt me, rather than you make me angry, or I feel unheard when you don't listen to me, instead of you never listen to me. When you find yourself disagreeing with someone, it can be easy to get defensive and start pointing fingers. But by using I statements, you can shift the focus to your own experience and feelings. And this massively helps de-escalation. So teaching children and young people to use I statements will have a huge impact on how messages are sent and received. Don't misunderstand me, transitioning from you statements to I statements will take a lot of practice, and you'll need to play a part in helping your young people to become more self-aware about how they communicate. So help them to notice when they use you statements and support them to try and rephrase them as I statements. And by doing that, you'll slow the conflict down again and get them thinking. I've also taught young people to be mediators, peer mediators, and they facilitate dialogue and help resolve conflict. So instead of you getting involved, you get some neutral mediators, and that's really game changing as well. Again, it takes practice, it takes training. I can help with that. I'll give you some resources at the end. And as well as acting as mediators, I've also seen young people encourage their peers to reflect on past conflicts and identify strategies that were effective or weren't effective last time around. Children really do learn from each other. I'm going to pause and take a drink. Give me a second. Breathing is really important, not only because it keeps us alive, but because it's one of the easiest ways to manage our emotions and to support our young people to regulate. Deep breathing slows the heart rate and flattens that dysregulation curve. In high stress situations, it's crucial to remain calm and think clearly. Navy SEALs use box breathing as a way to get their nervous system under control before they do their Navy SEAling. This involves visualizing a square and matching their breathing to the sides of that square. So you breathe in, you hold it, you breathe out, and you breathe in. Not as fast as that, obviously. A slightly more child-friendly version that doesn't require any visualization is to put out a paw and trace a finger up and down each digit while taking a deep, calm breath and counting to 5 as you breathe in through your nose and 5 as you breathe out through your mouth. For added benefit, you can close your eyes, which will reduce sensory input and speed up the return of calm. It does actually drop your heart rate. And if you want to add a further dimension to this, you can ask children to count their breaths as they inhale and exhale in their head. All of this will generate calm and refocus the mind. Now, I'm a big fan of deep breathing and practicing mindfulness to manage emotions and behavior, but there are several other self-regulation techniques that can help young people to succeed. These techniques should be shared when young people are calm, so they can be told to use them when they're at risk of dysregulation. So teach them when they're calm, so you can just say, do this when they're not. Here are a few other ideas. Movement absolutely can be used to support regulation. Think about that fight or flight response for a second. You should never fight that. Let it play out. If flight is possible and safe, let them run around. Send them out into the school field or the playground. If it isn't possible, invest time in other strategies that could be pulled out when stress levels start to build. A good one that works especially well with older children is to encourage them to tighten and then relax muscles in their body in sequence. It sounds really strange, I know, but progressive muscle relaxation, when you purposefully tense and release body parts, really does work. So clenching or unclenching your toes. Anybody that's seen Die Hard knows that Bruce Willis did that, and it stopped him being anxious. Your fists or clenching your bum or working up and down your body, tightening and releasing muscles in turn is a proven technique to reduce stress and anxiety. For little children, whilst they're sat on a chair, getting them to put their hands under their bum and to push up on the chair has a centering effect, much like a weighted blanket, and it's something they can do in their chair, and it's not too obvious as well. Visualization is a really great tool. So encourage your children to close their eyes and imagine themselves in a calm and peaceful environment, or, I don't know, eating a chocolate cake, or anything really that they can visualize clearly to help them relax and refocus their attention. And if they need help with this, you can try leading them through a guided imagery exercise where you use your words to help them imagine themselves in a peaceful setting, like walking on a beach or, I don't know, walking through a park. Guided imagery can help children escape stress and promote a sense of calm, and is really useful if they're struggling to visualize on their own. If you've been to one of my previous sessions, you remember I'm a big fan of sensory boxes. Essentially, it's just a shoebox filled with personal objects that can be made available when your young person needs to reach for a smell or a touch or a taste or a picture that can take them away from the moment they're in and onto a happier one. So what you're doing here, as well as supporting visualization, is promoting sensory regulation. If you don't want to try a sensory box, even though they're awesome, definitely make provision for sensory tools or materials like stress balls or fidget toys or anything textured that children can use to regulate their sensory input and self-soothe when they're feeling a bit overwhelmed. Staying with sensory for a moment, teaching children grounding techniques such as focusing on the present moment by naming 5 things they can see, 4 things they can touch, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and something they can taste is a great way to bring them back to the present and engages the right part of their brain and reduces that anxiety, because anxiety leads to the dysregulation. I mentioned words earlier on and need to be gentle not only with others but with ourselves as well. Encouraging young people to repeat positive affirmations or positive self-talk will promote their self-confidence and resilience. How many of us have beaten ourselves up really mercilessly about a situation we got ourselves into or something we said that we shouldn't have? We make ourselves feel wretched. I know I do. And our young people are doing this all of the time as well. So positive self-affirmation can help them and us reframe negative thoughts. Journaling for older people as well, writing down their thoughts can provide another therapeutic outlet for them to process their emotions. And again, it slows everything down. But whatever you try, making sure you've got a quiet area in your classroom or in your school where they can go to take a break and regulate when they're feeling overwhelmed is a real must. When a child's entering a state of dysregulation, they will be heightened and working in the limbic part of their brain, so won't be ready to be reasoned with. And in situations like that, you just absolutely have to reduce social demands by supporting them to leave the classroom or directing them to a quiet space. In my schools, many of which were little village schools, I invested in pop-up tents because we didn't have extra rooms to go off to as a quiet space. And they're great in situations where you need a quick space for a young person to isolate and a way to reduce input. So pop the tent up, throw it down, tell them to get in the tent. It really works. We're nearly at the end. So redirecting attention is a foolproof technique for de-escalation, challenging behaviour. It's important to get to the root cause of the behaviour, but when things go wrong, a distraction can be useful. Directing the child's attention to a different activity or a task that's engaging and appropriate can help shift their focus away from the challenging behaviour that they're starting to show. Giving them a sensory tool or an object to manipulate, like a stress ball or a fidget spinner or something like that, can help reduce stress as well. Creating an opportunity for them to take a short break from the classroom to calm down and refocus is another winner. If you don't think they're going to respond to a direct suggestion to take a time out, set up a system with a colleague in another classroom whereby a fictitious need for that young person can be invented. So you send a note saying, get this person to come back with some pencils, and then someone comes and says, oh, thingy Bob, I need some pencils. That bounce out of the classroom, I call that an antiseptic bounce, gives you and them a chance to regain some calm. Definitely consider using humour to diffuse tension and lighten the mood. A joke or a comment can de-escalate situation. Just make sure that your joke doesn't undermine their self-esteem, because an attack on that will just escalate the situation. And don't minimize their problem either. That's only going to hasten dysregulation as well. Now, inevitably, some situations will get out of hand. And if you came to this session for the dysregulation ideas, this is our final stretch. We want to try and, in those situations, we want to try and stay calm and maintain our own control. We need to model calm and composed behavior to prevent the situation from escalating further. We need to speak in a calm and reassuring tone. We need to maintain calm over our own emotions. We definitely don't dismiss what they're feeling, but we acknowledge their feelings and validate their experiences. We got to let them know that we understand that they're upset and frustrated and that we're there to help them. We got to listen to them attentively, without interrupting. Show empathy and understanding, validate their feelings by reflecting back what they've said to you to make sure you've got it right. And when you think you've got a good understanding of the situation, offer them choices to help them regain a sense of control. For example, give them options they can use to address the situation and move forward. If they've overstepped, remind them of the expectation and the boundary for behaviour. Don't do this to threaten as a consequence, but to support them to make better choices. By showing them you're calm and that you're curious and that you care about them, even when they've done something that isn't helpful, they will calm down because they're seeing you as a centered, calm person. They'll latch onto that. And when they calm, praise them for staying calm and for cooperating with you. Really praise their efforts to self-regulate and manage their behavior. I shared the acronym SEA in one of the previous sessions. S is for your safety cue, so think about your face, your tone of voice, your body language. E is for empathy. Be curious, try and understand, enter every situation with an open mind and with the idea that you really do want to help them, even though you might be at your wit's end. If ask them, I see you're upset, can I help? And if they share what the problem is, thank them for sharing, because it's taken bravery. And if they've told you to go away, still thank them and say, thanks for telling me your words, using your words to tell me you need to be alone. It sounds like you're not ready to talk to me now, but I'll come back to you in a few minutes, and definitely go back to them in a few minutes. And then the A of the C acronym is for agreements. If you've agreed something specific with them previously, like a plan of action when things go wrong, just remind them of this. If it's as simple as a classroom rule, remind them of the rule, just simply without any fuss. And always bear in mind a child's likely to be in a heightened state and accessing the wrong part of their brain, that limbic part again. So the fewer words you use and the simpler language you can use, the better. As I said at the start of this session, disruptive or distressed behaviour is communicating a need. And if we invest time and energy and resources into improving our relationships with young people, we will understand that need a bit better and be in a much better position to meet it and to de-escalate it. And that whistle-stop tour is at an end.